Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and its Ukrainian proxy forces. Now, in the last few days, there have been a series of Ukrainian attacks against Russia proper. Most notably, most notably not here in the mainstream media in the West, is the attack on Kazan, 600 miles east of Moscow. Here's the front lines. Here's Moscow, and then 600 miles east is the city of Kazan. This is a thriving city, a city that is growing in population by almost 10% per year. Now, as we said, over the last few days, Ukrainian forces have launched attacks against targets inside of the city. What are the Ukrainians going after? Are they going after military targets? Maybe. But are they also going after civilian targets? And the answer to that is absolutely correct. Here is a photograph of a Russian high-rise, a ultra-modern, newly built structure that was struck 9/11 style by a Ukrainian drone. Again, purposely designed to go after this high-rise. And not only this high-rise was hit, but a multitude of high-rise buildings were hit. So what is happening? Why are we seeing this taking place? Well, in all likelihood, we are going to see the war start to change. If we go back to the 1980s, during the Iran-Iraq War, Iran and Iraq had entered a phase in that conflict at a certain point. It was called the War of the Cities. Both sides were launching ballistic missiles on each other's cities and capitals. Tehran was hit, Baghdad was hit, and a host of other cities as well. Now, what's interesting, over the course of the last few days, there has been very little reporting in the mainstream media about this Ukrainian strike. Now, if we would have flipped this and we would have had dramatic footage of Russian autonomous drones attacking Ukrainian high-rise buildings, that would have made the mainstream media here in the United States, Western Europe. But when the Ukrainians attack Russian civilian infrastructure, silence. You hear nothing. Nothing at all. So are the Russians going to respond? Absolutely. Are the Russians going to strike civilian targets? Civilian targets could get hit. There could be collateral damage. In all possibility, the Russians will go after Ukrainian command and control. They will go after the elements within the Ukrainian military that launched these strikes against these Russian apartment buildings. Now, you'll probably hear about that in the mainstream media. But you did not see that very dramatic drone footage of the strike on this apartment building in the mainstream media here in the West. Very difficult to even see on YouTube as they censor it very, very quickly. They will demonetize you if you show that footage. If you show Russian strikes on Ukrainian targets, you are less likely to be demonetized and less likely to be censored. Now, additionally, the Ukrainians continue to develop long-range weapon systems, such as this picture here of a Ukrainian ballistic missile that in all likelihood will be used against Russian cities. Other systems as well, cruise missiles. So this first series of attacks against Kazan was probably designed to desensitize, to see what happened. Will the media pick this up? Will the media report in the West on these strikes? Probably not. If that doesn't occur, if there's no reporting on it, then these strikes will continue. Probably with other weapon systems. We will probably see these ballistic missiles that the Ukrainians are developing right now be used against Russian cities. Cruise missiles against Russian cities. Civilian targets. Now, if the Russians respond, that will be reported. That is what is happening within this conflict. I mean, if you think about it, the hypocrisy is off the charts. It really is. The reporting is very poor, one-sided, and unfortunate. But again, what is going to be the Russian response? There is going to be a response. And there already has been a response to some extent. There was targets hit in Kiev and other sites as well, military infrastructure sites. But again, very few civilians were killed. Less than half a dozen in that initial Russian retaliatory strike. What's interesting is if you, over the course of the entire conflict, the Ukrainians are reporting approximately 12,000 civilians have been killed. Now, this is a high-intensity war. If we were to go back in time to, say, World War II, and we were to look at the Allied bombing campaign against, say, Dresden, there was more Germans and or Japanese killed in one firebombing campaign, one firebombing raid against German or Japanese cities, one raid, than in the entire loss of civilian life during the Ukrainian-Russian war. So think about that for a second. And given the state of technology, what the Russians could do, if the Russians wanted to obliterate a city with cruise missiles and ballistic missiles, especially some of these cities that are closer to the line of contact, the Russians could do it. The Russians could annihilate entire cities. The Russians could bombard Kiev with fuel air explosive laden Iskander ballistic missiles and level the city, or change the cityscape as you know it, killing thousands upon thousands upon thousands of civilians, driving the civilian populace out of Kiev. The Russians could do that. The Russians could have shelled Kiev when they had made that initial drive upon the city earlier in the war. Didn't do it. And there's a reason they didn't do it. Because inherently, the Russians and the Ukrainians are one people. Now, if you listen to the mainstream media here in the West, they're not going to say that. You're going to hear things like the Ukrainians have a completely separate language, which is not true. Most Ukrainians speak Russian. But that is not what you will hear. Head over to the deep state map quickly here. Again, the Kurakova offensive continues. We will do a brief back up and forward of what is happening on the battlescape. Again, attention here and some of these other areas where these envelopment operations continue. And again, as we had talked about previously yesterday, tough situation for Ukrainian forces. You can see just dozens of envelopment operations taking place. The Russians at this point are isolating battalion combat groups, company-sized elements, enveloping, destroying, and then taking control of that territory. And this will continue until, again, probably towards the summer, we will see the general collapse of the Ukrainian military. More to come, as always. Thank you for joining us. Have a good day.